This is Will Riley, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Hell yeah. I did a show. A buddy of mine is a longtime local news reporter, editor, just knows news inside and out. Hard news guy, right? So we've started breaking down news stories because you'll see and headlines can be a lot of sensational. We got to allow some stickiness in those things. But we've started breaking down news, and as you know, just you find out there's a lot of problems with this. We just broke down this recent uh, claim that the IDF was whacking people as they were coming up to get aid. 400 people was recorded. Of course, the source is the Hamas Ministry of Health, and then everything starts falling apart. And so you see the story written, and they slyly slide in a little bit of direction. They don't provide both sides of a thing, and we don't want to give IDF a pass here, but then towards the end of the show, I reveal that hey, all of these news organizations retracted this story completely because it was false. Yet there's people all over X still talking about how the Jews are murdering a bunch of people going up to get aid. What do we do about this? What does your political science brain say that we need to do about these things where news organizations are look? It's obvious that Hamas Health is not going to report accurately. They haven't throughout the conflict. What do we do about all this?
Yeah, and it looks like there's some kind of minor connection issue here. Okay, so yeah, obviously we can still hear each other and so on. Okay, yeah, the my baseline opinion is that pretty much everything that comes out of Gaza is bullshit. Hamas is a terrorist group. Israel has its own flaws. I'm sure by this point they don't like Palestinians. They've been at war with one another for years. But I mean, it's just really implausible when you see these stories like Israel opens fire unprovokedly on innocent women seeking aid. I would guarantee, like, we have a similar military. There might be some prejudices, but very well trained. A lot of the Israeli guys are reservists from like Chicago and
Yeah,
Scarsdale.
right.
So there's no chance that happened. I mean, my take on that would be that there are one of two things that happened. Either Hamas shot a lot of those people. Like Hamas has been notorious for doing this, like putting guys in alleyways dressed as whatever, neutrals, non-fighters, and opening fire on Israeli soldiers, opening fire on citizens and killing them to make it seem that Israel did this. That's one option. The other option is that because that's a male-dominated actual patriarchy in Gaza, the people that are going to look for aid are 90% adult male fighters, and you have kind of surges of people toward the outnumbered soldiers. Like, where is it? Where's the rice? Where's the wheat? And the soldiers who know they could be beaten to death, open fire, shoot in the sky first, then shoot a few people. But like the idea that Israel, the way this is presented in the Western media is that Israel's almost setting up mousetraps, right?
Right.
Like they'll put some food on the ground and they've got like snipers and guys on oversight around the food and they're just shooting Palestinians. As entertaining as that might be for an evil person involved in a war, I don't think that there's any of that going on at all. So yeah, I think the main issue is that the U.S. media leans really far to the left. Palestine is a somewhat sympathetic cause. I mean, they are running out of food, and so everything is told from this perspective of the brutal oppressors are targeting these innocent Arabs and so on, and that's just totally fake. Like everything Palestine says is fake.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Ministry of Health getting it wrong repeatedly throughout this conflict, this current conflict is a norm. So when Patrick and I were talking about this, if you're an editor and Will brings me a story and you're quoting Hamas Ministry of Health, I, I'm going to turn you around and be like, hey, man, that don't fly around here. We already got burned by those guys once. It's fine to get burned once, but you have to learn from that and say, they're not a credible source until further notice. If there's a story there, find me another source. But we don't see that level of integrity. And look, it's cynical, but it's probably true. It doesn't sell. It doesn't. That kind of integrity doesn't sell papers.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah, for sure. That's a
Yeah.
problem with everything. So you mean you have articles where sources include like cops that are actually on the street, gang members shooting at each other. I mean, so yeah, just you're gonna try to put that story out. In terms of why Hamas gets a break, I think there's a general UN problem here. Like, so there's an idea on the Western left that we should pretend that all societies are pretty much equal and that any skepticism should be reserved for us. There's actually a whole thing in lit crit and so on, the skeptical eye or the critical eye, and that's supposed to be applied to the Western world because we are, the big tough place where the minorities were abused in the past and so on. So you're supposed to look really hard at us, and other than that, just assume everyone's equal. And the problem with that is that people aren't equal. People exist at radically different levels of civilizational development. So, I mean, we don't particularly like the party I'm about to mention first, but there's obviously a difference in terms of ability to functionally protect women's rights between like Russia or France on the one hand and like Papua New Guinea on the second. But the United Nations, all the international organizations refuse to believe that. And so you get this weird shit like Qatar and Saudi Arabia being appointed to international women's panels and so forth. And everybody knows it's just ridiculous. It's just hilarious. But you'll literally have a Saudi diplomat a couple of days ago. I think this would still be the guy tweeting out like any job is a woman's job. And there's a reality of like, bro, in your country, women have only been able to drive for 6 months. What are you talking about? It's the same thing with Hamas. I mean, Hamas is treated as the official government of Palestine. So, I mean, to a newspaper reporter, it'd be odd not to report what the official government of a place says, but they're also an internationally recognized terrorist group. So there has to be some recognition of that, right? Like that a statement from Hamas is not equivalent to a statement from Pam Bondi for all her issues.
Yeah.
But no one seems willing to do that.
Yeah, and there's the other reality is that at least the U.S. and I would say most of the world I've encountered recently doesn't even recognize the state of Palestine. It's not a recognized place.
Yeah.
And so it's like they have a government. They are kind of an autonomous region of sorts. But even then, because they're filled with terrorists, there's a problem with credibility and what they get to do. So, I mean, that's a real tough thing. You aren't a state, and you can't be a state because of the way you behave.
Yeah. I mean, so this is something that people often forget when they talk about free Palestine and so on. Palestine doesn't exist. And in fact, Palestine has never existed. And I don't mean the stuff people debate online, like was there a Roman protectorate called Palestinia 2,200 years ago. I mean that in the recent past, there's never been a nation called Palestine. Palestine was an oppressed quadrant of the Ottoman Empire. Then it was an oppressed quadrant of the British Empire when they beat the Ottomans. There were Jews living there. There were Arabs living there. The groups have been fighting each other for about 100 years. Both the Jews and the Arabs in the 40s were credibly accused of terrorism. And Palestine right now is, I mean, what you have with Israel is there's the core of Israel, which includes a lot of Arabs, by the way. Israel's 20% Israeli Arabs. They get along about as well as whites and blacks do. So, I mean, that's just the thing. The whole apartheid state label comes from the fact that they're two self-declared independent countries. There's the West Bank over here, which is run by Abbas's party, I believe, right now, Fatah. And then there's the Gaza Strip, which is the shoreline region along the Med Sea that's broken away from Israel. It defended itself pretty well. And it's run by Hamas. And at least one of those two groups, if not both, is a terrorist group. I mean, Hamas is probably the most famous international terrorist group after ISIS and Al Qaeda. So Palestine has made a lot of noises about statehood, but there hasn't been a lot of serious progression towards statehood from Palestine, at least that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there might be a few experts in the chat, but I mean, there have been something like 9 peace proposals initiated by the Israelis and by players like the USA and the serious Arabs. And every one of them, I mean, Yasser Arafat and all those guys just got up from the table. And the reason for that, yeah, literally, like they got up and walked away. I mean, so Palestine's been offered a state a bunch of times, and not all of the proposals were exactly what you would have wanted. You have to figure out what to do with Jewish settlers on Arabic land. You have to figure out, for that matter, what to do with all the Arabs working in Jerusalem. But they were all coherent. I mean, I've looked at them, and it's like, we're going to split this 50-50. Maybe there's going to be a major road connecting the two sides of Palestine. Like there were serious proposals that you would negotiate on, and the Arabs just said no. And the reason for that is, I mean, if you actually have ever read the Hamas charter, their goal for Israel is from the river to the sea, Palestina will be free. Like they want the Jews broken militarily and out of that land. And the big thing with the Abraham Accords is that large Muslim countries for the first time said, look, we are not going to try to get rid of the state of Israel. I mean, if Israel actually fights real countries now, like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey might come in. I mean, that would actually be a bloodbath. You know, these Israelis have nuclear missiles at the seventh and last. So we're actually going to sign this deal saying, okay, you can stay here. And we now have a Jewish neighbor. And I think that's the healthy way to look at this. But that's not how Hamas looks at it.
No, that's for sure. And they also took the money they were given and built a military in and around their civil population. And instead of providing them with services and improving their livelihoods, they turned them into part of materiel. And again, part of their goal, as anybody watching doesn't understand this, is the messaging of starvation, genocide. This is part of what they create, and apparently a lot of us just want to hear that message. Which I guess gives us a bigger question is when we see ABC News retract completely, Washington Post retract completely these stories that were wrong, even though they've been duped again by Hamas Health, and you show that to folks and they flat reject it. What do we do about that? I mean, that's a brand of anti-Semitism that I don't know if you're going to fix it. And by the way, all of these people are in this region almost exclusively are Semites, but whatever. It just gets a little confusing when you try to decide who is and who isn't a Semite, whether they're a Syrian or a Israeli or an Assyrian. So yeah, I guess run with that. Like, what do we do about these folks that are immovable in terms of truth and logic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, I've been asked about some debates that I've had because in the past I've debated everyone from Jared Taylor, who founded the alt-right, to Rod Graham, who's an African-American left-wing sociologist. And people have said, I mean, do you expect to convince any of these opponents? And I've said, no. I mean, the reason you have a formal debate like that is to see who can convince the audience.
Right.
And I mean, Taylor, for example, is a good debater, but I've had people cite back some of my points to me, like, obviously large, diverse societies aren't a new thing. You've got the Roman Empire, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth making those points publicly. Similarly here, I mean, it's a lot of people in political science will point out that on October 8th, there were people carrying signs saying things like the genocide has begun and don't let the genocide happen. And some of those people might just be good faith opponents of war, but it seems to me really obvious that that was a pre-planned strategy. Like, we're going to commit this atrocity, or what's worse than atrocity under military law, genocide. So we're going to claim that any Israeli response is a genocide. The whole genocide canard is just extremely bizarre. I mean, we've both traveled overseas. I mean, a genocide is the extermination of more than half of a population group, basically. I mean, it's the attempt to exterminate a group combined with killing all of them or a substantial percentage of them. I mean, in Gaza right now, the entire death toll seems to be around 50,000. I mean, they just raised it from 46,000. That's on both sides. That includes the 1,200 plus all the IDF soldiers that have been shot. So, I mean, like, when you look at a war where one side's lost 40,000 men and one side's lost maybe 5,000 max, I mean, that you can't just say, well, that's ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's not what the word means. So I think a lot of people are just assuming that people won't know what genocide is in the real sense and are going to be sympathetic because you do see these injured people, sometimes including women and children. And I guess my point would be that's a campaign that was planned as soon as the quote unquote Al-Aqsa flood began. Like, it takes a couple of weeks to print out the kind of signs you see at these protests. So people had to be ready for that before Israel had started any kind of harsh retaliation. And they had to know that Hamas wouldn't just step down. Like, they had to be very 1, 2, 3 about like what was going to happen here. And that implies that the left in the USA and UK has some pipeline better than a lot of our espionage agencies do to these terrorists.
Yeah.
Like, I would assume there were conversations about how are we going to do this? What can we say? What can't we say? If you looked at the first college protest in 2024, people were like, I'm a professional political scientist. Like, I mean, I speak a bit of the language. You speak it well, as I understand. But like, just random college kids were like, yeah, Al-Aqsa flood. And it's just sort of like, you don't speak Arabic. Where's this information coming from?
Yeah.
And I think that's a real question about our own people.
Yeah. It does make you wonder. And Look, we have very powerful organizations that are good at gathering crowds. The No Kings protest, which, by the way, fine with that, right? Like this is part of what we do. We protest things. They get permits. They stand there. They make signs. They have messaging. They make sure they bring water. They make sure everybody tries to keep as safe and as calm as possible as they protest. That kind of capacity can be turned and used for a lot of different things. And
Mhm.
look at, like if the military does this, everybody does this, right? If you can gather a crowd, we were talking about this yesterday on the show. If there is a med op conducted by U.S. Army or U.S. military in a foreign place, guess what? A dude like me is standing in that crowd and I'm talking to people trying to find things out. You're not going to gather a crowd and not talk to folks. You have to because you're trying to see how things are going. So it's a communication device, whether it's out active doing it yourself or you're projecting communication out to a group of people who are willing to stand there and shake their fists and hold up a sign.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a problem so one of the things that I've done, and I'm not the snitch type, I'm not going to name any of these people, as silly as that might sound, or even the
Right.
organization. But I mean, when I was in graduate school, I worked for one of those, let's say the People's Project, one of those large, like left-wing organizations, because I was actually really pro-gay marriage, which is kind of funny from like a broy, like black and Irish dude. But I mean,
Yeah.
gay people, whatever, let them get married.
Yeah.
So I actually I didn't run it. A guy named Tom Bly did under the overall director, but I was one of the managers in an office full of people that would go out and campaign for these causes, and it's extremely well organized. I mean, the office is based in downtown Chicago. It's still there. It implies during the summer about 100 people. And you'll send people out through these slum neighborhoods, and you're in the outdoors in these areas, but through rich parts of town. You'll stop, you'll talk to strangers. You'll actually do a lot of this same stuff. Like you'll enter groups of people, see what they're talking about. You'll
Right.
wave and stop people on the street. There's what's called the GCI grab, where you'll almost literally pull people over to you and you'll start promoting these causes. And I mean, you're looking for voters, you're looking for fundraising, all this kind of stuff. The reason I'm going through all this is that there are dozens of these organizations. There's a group called the Grassroots Campaigns. There's the group I'm talking about, the People's Project. There's Greenpeace. And I mean, across the major cities, each one of these probably has 10,000 people on retainer, at least, March through November. Mostly young males who are comfortable with what the job's going to involve, which is a lot of strangers trying to fight you. It's probably the toughest and funniest job I've had. I mean, you're out there, it's snowing, you're chasing people, and people are literally swinging punches at you. And the point of all this is that we would frequently be called by political campaigns that would say, "Can you send us 100 to Colorado?" It's the last couple of weeks of the Dem race. And the
Right.
management team in the office would decide whether we would or not, but you'd put like 100 fighters on a really cheap ass plane. This is like below Spirit Airlines. It's like just you and the cargo. But you go
Yeah.
out there and you campaign for a couple of weeks. Like they give you a shirt, you stay in a hotel. There's a lot of hooking up going on. And I would assume that that has probably developed over the years into something even more sophisticated. And those people do have connections in the USA and globally. And this is how a lot of the BLM style protests happen. By the way, someone asked about the squirrel
Yes.
screensaver. Yeah, this is dog TV in the background. So basically, I have a dog here. The dog hunts a little bit, but when we both, myself and the Janester, go do stuff, we'll put on dog TV for the dog. And because I also hunt, I noticed that I find dog TV entertaining, and I think a lot of human males would. So I'll sometimes realize I've left it on for like 45 minutes in the background. So that's TV for dogs back there. And I mean, I imagine that female watchers this are going to be like, "This is ridiculous. These fucking guys are watching squirrels run around." But I mean, it's actually quite relaxing. It's what you're supposed to be doing in the woods, sit by a creek.
I was,
Anyway,
yeah, that's funny. Go ahead.
but no, I mean, I'm almost done with this. But like, I would assume that these organized, paid organizations are the main force behind protests, where you've got guys that are like Division II lacrosse players who could fight pretty well. 100 of them, all races, coming in a block. They've got their pre-made signs, and that's what Kings used to call a claque. Like that's the center that everything else forms around. So like when you see the perfectly made pallets of bricks right by the riot, or you
Right.
see everyone sleeping in a tent from REI that costs exactly $66 if you buy more than 50 of them. I would assume, I'm no longer in those circles, but I would assume that somebody did that. Like they didn't just all go to the camping store themselves, like from the hood, and
Right.
buy those and tote them to the BLM march.
Right.
So Yeah, I mean, all this goes on. It's a problem that there is foreign infiltration in it, just like that irritates me on Twitter.
Right. Yeah, I did an interview with a person from a prominent liberal family, and they were working on a project, and so had him on the show, and we discussed offline this basic mechanism of gathering money for bail to get people out of jail to buy the tents or whatever it is, and this is a very civic powerful thing. Like they want to create a message. These people have money, but they don't have time, and so they invest in people who have time and no money, and they go out and they do these things. It's at a certain level, it's totally fine. When it becomes the spreading of lies about genocide and causing harm to people, then you're well over that line. I don't know what that line is. Do you have a sense for that? Like when organizing and doing things like politicking for gay marriage, like that's cool. I think we're all okay with someone doing that. When does it cross the line into something that's nefarious and dangerous, maybe illegal?
Well, I think you actually asked that really well. I mean, I think when it breaks the law, so, I mean, I've talked to, I have a kind of country squire role out here where I speak to the Republicans and like I teach at the local college. I mean, even myself and Daryl Pinto's like little pistol training courses registered, like local organizations have it on the wall. So I'll go talk to people. And I mean, generally my comment to a cop or something like that would be, protesting. The standard in my profession is that it crosses the line when it turns into rioting. What's a
Yeah,
riot? I mean, it's a crowd of more than 300 that refuse to disperse. Like there are technical definitions of all these things.
right.
So I don't really have a problem with people protesting for Palestine. I don't have a huge problem with international students from Palestine being in those protests. But I think from there on up, it becomes an issue. I mean, do I have a
Right.
problem with a page where if you argue with them and you obtain an IP address, you see that they're in Qatar, them giving money to an American protest? I mean, yeah, that's becoming a serious issue at that point. And then if the protest starts rioting, yeah, you gotta go in and arrest people. So I think the solution is just basically follow the laws. Like if you want to sit on your ass on the campus quad and scream free, free Palestine, I mean, you absolutely have a right to do that.
Yeah.
You have a right to
Yeah.
march through the streets as long as you got a permit. The way
Yeah.
I'll approach this if I ever run for mayor or something is just, you probably regular viewers of myself and Pete have probably heard that everyone who pops up in these discussions, including me, Pete, our buddy Brooks, so on, is not too serious about whether rules ultimately exist. But definitely, if I were in a local leadership role, I would be very stringent about the rules. So, like a march comes through the street, you have an
Yeah.
equivalent number of officers there, and you ask, well, where's your permit? And if there isn't one, well, that's the end of it. But if
Yeah.
every step has been followed and the people are peaceful, yeah, it's cool, whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You need to be able to stand on that and say, "Hey, we're protesting. We're not rioting." But the second someone cocks back their arm with something in it, you enter the zone of, "Oh, that might be a crime right there." So we don't do that around here. We're trying to cause a bigger thing, not you getting to throw a rock at somebody or brain somebody in the head. There is a line there, and yeah, for sure, when it goes to international intrigue and something where you despise a group of people, the Jews in this case, the damn Jews, uh, it's probably over that line. And here's the other thing, right? If you do these kinds of things, and the Israelis are like, "We believe you, you hate us, and you want to exterminate us," they now get to do whatever they need to protect themselves, because that's what they have to do when they're surrounded by several different fronts wanting to fight them at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no secret that I'm very pro-Israel here. I mean, obviously, I think you and I both, and you more than me, because you've actually seen certainly official, more serious combat overseas.
Sure.
But both of us would encourage people. War crimes are in general disgusting. You don't want your troops canoeing random citizens in the head or raping women or something like that. It
Yeah.
makes people think like bandits and they bring that back home. So hopefully both sides will avoid that. But in terms of everyone but the actual fighting men, I mean, it's obvious that Israel is the more sympathetic cause.
Yeah.
Like the Palestine's leadership is literally made up of Arab terrorists. Like that, it's literally a terrorist group. I mean, so that's the backstory of all of this. I mean, like this war began because, and it was actually a very skillful initial invasion gambit. I mean, you think of like Indian raids in terms of the level of trickery used and how they got in and so on. But I mean, this war began with what I've earlier described as the Al-Aqsa flood, where these people flew over the Israeli border on paragliders and started killing and raping citizens.
Yeah.
I mean, they beat one military unit, which was skillfully done, but other than that, they just went into kibbutzim and shot people. I mean, some of the most extreme stories of babies were burnt alive and so on, or seem to be exaggerated. I mean, they did find burnt remains in that location, but it's very difficult to progress from that to, if you're a normal person, sympathy for the Palestinian side in the war. And I think that's why there was so much pre-prepped stuff here. I mean, the idea was, we're going to do something that wouldn't be conventionally acceptable. So we need this narrative behind it. And the narrative is that we are brave resistance fighters resisting. The response from Israel is going to be even worse than the initial action. But none of this is true. I mean, if you talk to Dr. Spencer on this show, right?
Yeah. Bunch. Yeah.
Yeah, great guy. But I mean, like, his comment is actually like, if you look at the number of kills relative to the number of incidents of collateral damage, this may be the most controlled, contained war that's ever been fought.
That's right.
And I would tend to agree with that. I mean, even Hamas, when they were actually asked questions by serious international diplomats, said they rechecked their numbers, wink, nudge, and they said that at least 46% of the people that were dead were fighters. So, I mean, it's important to understand that when someone says like minors make up 40% of the casualties, if you're using the European standard, that's anybody under 20. I mean, the average age that an Arab male would join one of these military forces is like 15 or 16.
Right.
So a lot of these figures that are being cited don't mean anything. I mean, people keep saying, well, babies make up X% of the dead. There are almost no babies that have been killed by either side. I mean, like, there's just repeated debunkings every time either one comes out and claims that.
Right.
There are a bunch of young male warriors that have been killed. And when you start unpacking these kind of things, it's just like, okay, Israel lies a little bit too. But this stuff out of Hamas is just insane. And from there, it's very easy to come to the standpoint of the Palestinians are absolutely unsympathetic here. Like, looked at in a cold light, they seem to have started a war and then lost it.
Yeah, and didn't have the balls to say, "Hey, we surrender. Here are your hostages back. You know, we will abide this treaty." You know, they haven't done any of that. And the second they do, the violence ends, but they won't do it. And so they insist on this killing continuing. Does that absolve the Israel of any kind of wrongdoings? No, of course not. But John Spencer, if we're going to allow him to be the expert that he is with the access that he has, he'll tell you that they are the most disciplined army in terms of killing civilians that has ever existed. And that's also an academic measure. He's not just making that up. He's looking at the numbers, he's looking at the policies, he's looking at everything. And that's what he is saying right now, is that no army has ever been more disciplined and protective to their own detriment. You know, their own soldiers losing their lives because of their desire to be on the right side of the civilian death cause.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's correct. So, like, people don't understand that Israel, I mean, Israel went toe to toe with Iran recently, and if anything, won. I mean, they were destroying real stuff where Iran was bombing hospitals and so on. Israel could have, against a terrorist level, cartel level, but not national level opponent like Hamas, literally just leveled Gaza. I mean, they could have dropped bunker busters on every reinforced concrete, tunnel access point Hamas had, and then just leveled the rest of the place and killed everybody in it. And they very specific, and I would be very tempted to do this if I were an Israeli general. Like, given modern American training, I probably wouldn't. But like, looking at the pictures of the 1,200 like rape hostages or victims of the first attack, it's just like, fuck these people. Like, wipe them out, and this will never happen again. All these modern laws against genocide and so on date back like 70 years. So, I mean, that inclination had to have been there, and it would have been very easy to do. What they did instead was send their military basically door to door. I mean, a lot of this is more than 60% of the attacks have been ground fighting, like close quarters battle. And they very easily could have just not done that. So two other things in terms of like Hamas is a very unsympathetic player. The war ends whenever Hamas gives the hostages back. At this point, they might not even all have to go to exile. And I think most people to comment on this, left or right, are aware of that. And that brings up one of those very basic questions of like, if you're assigning moral fault, not just like both armies have slipped up and shot the wrong people sometimes, but who's morally responsible for this war? I mean, it would clearly, once again, be Hamas. It would be the people that started the war and could, without significant penalty, end the war, but are refusing to. And I think there are two horrible reasons why they're refusing to. Three horrible reasons, actually. Horrible reason one is, you might correct my location, but most of the Hamas leaders don't live in Gaza.
That's right.
And if you're familiar with that, like WikiLeaks, Telegram, et cetera, portion of the internet, I think they're mostly still in Qatar, but
Yeah, that's
they
right.
probably, yeah, they're still there.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, I'm not a Mossad, so I don't know. I guarantee you, those guys know. They're just
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
on
I
that
mean,
information.
obviously. And every so often you see a vehicle blow up in like Dubai. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
draw your own conclusions. But like, I don't think that the Hamas leadership, most of whom are billionaires, are involved really with this at all at a moral level. I mean, I think the idea is, well, if the boys on the ground can keep them fighting about evenly, good. And that leads into number two, which is I
Mhm.
don't see much motivation from the leadership on the Palestinian side to save their own people. And I
Yeah.
think this is a unique situation in terms of military affairs. Like even fucking samurai Japan surrendered. Almost invariably, leaders, when you say like we're going to make you surrender, it's going to be somewhat unconditional, but there's going to be no torture, there's going to be no rape, the war's over, honorable fight. Almost every country, when they hear that, it's just like okay, I mean, it's just you give up. The
Right.
Confederacy gave up. What
Yeah.
do you do with an opponent that doesn't give up? Where everyone over 12 who's male is insistent on fighting to the death. I mean, I would personally just oblige them,
You
but there
oblige them.
actually
Yeah.
is yeah, but there is a moral question there. And I
Yeah.
think Hamas in particular doesn't care about civilian deaths at all.
Yeah.
Whenever a senior Mujahideen commander has been asked about this on the air, they've actually said, well, this is the CNN strategy, right? Like Sheikh bin Laden wrote about this. The more young people that die, the more of an advantage we gain because our ally is the global media. Our ally is papers in Western Europe, civilized
Yeah.
Africa, so on. America. So I think they're still doing that. That's point
Mhm.
two. And a third kind of horrible thing that we have to recognize is that Hamas doesn't know where the fucking hostages are.
Yeah.
This is one of the big problems about the Gaza war. When the border broke on 7 October, we initially thought that basically just Hamas fighting men, like soldiers or a quarter notch below, went into Gaza. And we now know that the reason there was so much rape and arson, which the Hamas guys actually, for all their flaws, tried to stop on a few occasions, is that just random fucking people from Palestine broke into Israel. And there's
Right.
just this incredible hatred on both sides there. So they just started attacking people. And you started seeing girls being wrapped up with cord and thrown on the back of scooters, this kind of stuff. And those people weren't taken to some kind of army base. Like all of those people are probably just in Gaza City getting raped. I mean, and I think this is something no one wants to talk about because the question is at the end of the war, no matter who's in power, are there going to be like 50 shallowly buried bodies of prominent citizens that we could never recover? And the answer is likely, yeah. Can I say one more thing about this?
Please.
I was talking to a buddy once, and his dad was a Vietnam guy. He had a POW MIA flag on his house. And I didn't mean to offend him with this, but it was just my comment was, do you think there are prisoners of war over in East Asia? Do you think that years later, this is like 50 years ago now, do you think years later anyone survives? And he gave a reasonably coherent explanation of why he thought some were. And my response, I remember thinking, I don't think I said this, was just like, no, the Viet Cong government obviously just killed them all. Like the as Vietnam became a mainstream international player again, if there were 50 American flight lieutenants over there, whatever the technical title is, they just shot them in the head and threw them in the jungle. There
Yeah.
was no way those people would be allowed to play any potential role as bargaining chips or to show up tortured, missing fingernails years later. No, they just killed them. And I think this is a problem with Hamas as well. Like Israel knows the exact number of hostages and they know every hostage's name. And it's going to be very difficult to try to play something off where you give back 2/3 of those people or something like that. So I don't know. I don't think Hamas feels that they can return the full number of hostages that they would need to return to get a peace. And this
Yeah.
has come up before, right? Where they've sent back coffins where they said, well, this is an underage youth hostage. Unfortunately, they were burned by a bomb. They didn't know that Israel has more modern DNA testing than we do now. So they just tested a shard of hair or something like that. And they found out that this was just a random different person. It was probably a Palestinian girl. I don't see how they get past that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also important to say when we have this number of 60,000 dead, that's the number, one of the numbers that they throw around.
So,
We don't know how many Japanese died on Iwo Jima 80 years ago. We still haven't figured that number out. So these numbers in the now, like right now today, sure, are we better counting? Okay, yeah. Is it not on an island halfway across the world? Okay, sure. But it's awfully tough when buildings are destroyed and people, like, some dudes might have just absconded from the area, like just snuck out, because some are going to do that. There's all kinds of reasons why the count can be off, especially if you want it to be off. It's easy to double count bodies. And we know from video evidence that some of the dead people who aren't even dead still, they've been counted. So there is a problem with the number. And so when folks say 60,000, and again, who's the source? Oh, it's Hamas Health. All right, well, let's figure out what the number is. And yeah, are those military age males? Because those 15-year-olds that are chomping at the bit, wanting to get out and get into it, they're dead, but are they civilians? Nah, that's not civilians. Especially with terrorism, right? Because it's hard to say, like, well, this person was never mustered in. Well, it doesn't work like that with these modern fights. I wanted to ask you this too, because we love to use dead people to move emotionally, to move us. So when we talked about cutting USAID and putting it under state, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. And here's what Pete would say from his experience with USAID: they can't reliably deliver what they say when they're there on the ground. I mean, this is just from working with them directly. They primarily screw things up. And so when they say things like, well, we fed 40,000 people, until they can show you the numbers and have them independently verified, it's bullshit. Because, and this is a slightly different thing. It's one step over, but we had this survey that did survey research. I probably mentioned this to you before, Will. And they would hire Afghans to go out and do survey research. And so I didn't want to use it because it's a waste of time and money, but we were supposed to use it, so we used it. And we got back findings, and this is a very dangerous part of Afghanistan, with no roads, no access to cars, no electricity. It's rural and dangerous. They came back with a survey that had a greater data set than the known population of that county. I'm saying county, this is a province, right? And so we have problems even counting things when it's not dead bodies or anything else. Like, how do you get someone who's terrified to go into, how do you get like a Brooklyn, lefty nose pierce person to go down to South Alabama and go do survey information and work hard in the heat and expect them to reliably bring back a real product? It's even harder in Afghanistan. So when USAID says a bunch of people are going to die and everybody echoes that, I just think it's all bullshit. I'm not saying that nobody dies because they don't have aid. What I'm saying is USAID isn't particularly great at their job. They're extra bad at measuring it, and what they say always briefs better than what reality is. Those are my 3 cents.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, so a lot of that's just good numerical information in general, definitely true. But I mean, another point would be the Hamas data is obviously fake. One way to tell this, actually, if you're a decent quant online, which I mean, I still am, is just that the increase is directly linear. So that would never happen in battle or in any other serious situation like this. So like, I remember they got called out for this a couple of months ago. Every day, the number of dead would increase by exactly 430 or something. Mm-hmm. So it's just a steady progression upward. And it looked like there was a number they wanted to get to, like 200,000. And this was the simplest way to get to it. The actual way that would happen, because sometimes the Arab guys on the ground are winning. Sometimes the Israelis are winning. More often that's the case. But you have different numbers of deaths. Sometimes there's a ceasefire. What you'd actually see in terms of deaths would be like 12, 56, 14, 305, 2, 5, 360. So yeah, I mean, it's again that question of what do you do with an opponent that's just lying? And this is why, like, I'm a big numbers guy, but we need to understand that a lot of numbers are drastically unreliable. This came up with a conversation on Twitter a couple of weeks ago where someone was critiquing the homicide numbers for these African countries like Ghana and Nigeria, which are often very low. Like, the officially reported number is 2 homicides per 100,000 people per year or something like that. And this person, they call himself Inquisitive Bird. It's some kind of European researcher, I'm pretty sure. But their comment was, this is just bullshit. Like, in Nigeria, the one time they did surveys, they found that the homicide rate was 10 times as high. Mm-hmm. But the problem there was that they were doing these in like inner city Lagos, as I recall. And so that's probably an overestimate of what the actual number is. The 2 number comes from murders in these tribal countries that are accurately reported to the central government. Right. So you've got these 2 figures, both of which are probably nonsensical. And in this case, I and others pointed out, like, there is a number in the middle that's probably correct. which is, the World Health Organization, World Bank, and so on, keep track of the number of dead people reported on death certificates, that kind of thing, which like a Nigeria or a Bosnia is well up to the point of having. And if you look at that, you get a third number, which is like 7 homicides per 100,000 people per year, which is probably correct. Now, the interesting thing about that is like the American black murder rate is 33 per 100,000 per year. So like, even if you use that 7 number, it is kind of crazy that like a lot fewer West African black people are killed in Nigeria than in the USA. But the point is, like, the official government says they're 2. Bird, who's a good researcher, says they're 25. And the reality probably is like 8. And that's what all numbers from the third world look like. So yeah, when people, this was the issue. Well, you're a military guy. This is the issue in Vietnam, right? Body count.
Yeah. There's a lot of these kind of.
How does the military count dead enemies? I'm just curious. I've never known that.
Well, a battle damage assessment is the main thing. If they can, they put people on the ground. They use cameras. It gets further and further away from the ground, then it gets more fuzzy as to what happened on that day. One thing we don't do is go back and confirm those numbers externally. So, like, if I know that there's been an attack, I'll project myself out to that area and find out what happened. Because not only the dead people, we always think effect, the affect part. Hey, what happened the other day? Nothing. Just no big deal. Like, oh, okay. I heard some people died. Nah, it's all a bunch of bullshit. You want to see the fake graves? And then you walk over, and I'm not saying this happens specifically, but these kind of things happen all the time where you find out a whole different truth when you go out and you dig in. And that's what guys like me do. We go find out what's going on. So the numbers are always suspect. It's very, very hard to count things in real time in an area that it's non-permissive. It's just, they're all suspect. And so when I talk to my friends that only believe in quant, it drives them crazy. And I'm like, I don't trust the numbers, because who are you going to reliably get it? And then who's going back and looking at the method? We had a survey one time that the unit wrote, and this person wasn't a survey writing person. He was just doing his job. And every question was closed. It was yes, no question, which can be a valuable tool. But the way he wrote it was like, do you want a radio? Yes or no? Like, okay, yes. If we gave you a radio, would you listen to our programming? You guys all have guns? Yes. It's like, it's so you go out and you ask the questions in a different way, you get different answers, and instantly, and they were desperate to keep all of that information because they wanted 3 yeses on this form, and they were getting 3 yeses, and it was telling them what they wanted to hear. So that sweet, sweet lie, they needed it. And then when I would go back and say, here, I went and talked to these 15 village elders, and none of what you're saying is panning out. Maybe we need to rethink this. Also, another thing about this is, you write a survey question, is Wilfred Reilly a handsome man, yes or no? Okay, hey, Chester, translate that into Arabic. And it's like, okay. It's like the person reads it. I don't know what the fuck you're saying here. That gets completely confusing. And then when you translate it back, like you're supposed to do, back into English from the Arabic that you're going to put out in the world, and it says hamburgers are tasty, yes or no. And you're like, well, that's not the question I was asking. And that happened all of the time, where there was a disagreement on the translation. And I'm being dramatic in terms of burgers and Will's handsomeness, which is obvious, but that's a real thing. And how survey method, it's essential to understand it so you can make sure you're not fucking it up, getting like trimodal curves or something like that. But that's what happens.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. Like, the ultimate example of this about body count that I remember from any conversations involving military people was a guy talking about, in Vietnam, his unit engaged with the Viet Cong or whatever, and they shot a few people, but most of them were probably pulled away by the enemy, so they were never found. But there was like a body left there, and there was an arm left there, and so they reported the body and the arm as like 2 dead, and then they just doubled it to account for other people that might have been gone. Yeah. But that same day, apparently 3 or 4 other military units encountered the same body and the same arm, and didn't like try to claim them as like their kills, but were like, you should be aware that in conflict we saw this today, so we can assume 4 dead. And so, like, in the initial battle, they probably killed like 11 people, not 2 people. But because the two people became four and because five other groups of people also saw the two people, the number that ended up going into whatever the CENTCOM was, whatever the group was keeping track of these numbers was I think 25. And the guy was just like, remember, 24, I guess it would have been. And the guy was just like, remember, this is almost all bullshit. Like there's no, the initial number is probably 11, but it's not 2 and it's not 24 and we don't know it anyway. We'd probably be better served to look in terms of like land that we actually control. So I think that that's an issue pretty frequently where you have more people killed than there are people in the area technically or something like that. And yeah, I mean, it's especially important to remember this with Hamas because everything Hamas says is a lie. So it's not like just misinterpreted data. It's like Hamas will say we've lost 200,000 babies who are also doctors. And then you'll have to try to set up how that would work with normal parameters. Like, well, that might translate to 500,000. And that's how you get those estimates like, a quarter of the population of Gaza is dead. And those are all just made up. I mean, they come from applying data tricks to numbers that terrorists pulled out of their ass. The actual death count of 46 to 60,000 is probably about accurate, but we don't really know.
Right. Yeah. And won't know for quite some time if we ever know the real number. And that's the challenge of being desperate about these numbers. We also get told that if we don't bend over backwards and do a bunch of things, politically, socially, whatever, trans people are going to be dead all over the streets. How dangerous is it, Will, do you think, to be trans today?
Kind of a shift, but I mean, I don't really. It depends what you mean. It's not. It's kind of like being a black guy or a poor white guy. Like it's not dangerous at all in the sense that like wolves are going to attack you. It's pretty dangerous in the sense you might do some stupid shit that exposes you to danger.
Yeah.
The one time that I actually looked at this is one of my first articles for Quillet. I looked at whether there was an epidemic of trans murders. And I was able to get, actually, I still know some people that work for the Human Rights Campaign. So I was actually able to get the full unmessed with list of people that were gay and trans that were killed in the year, 2017, whatever it was. Yeah. And these weren't presented as hate crimes or anything like this. It was just all the known murders, not deaths, of someone who was trans in terms of the part that I looked at. And I think that year there were like 100 trans murders. It was a number that was 100 or below. And I compared that to the size of the trans population, which was 0.6% of the USA. And I found that the murder rate for trans people was lower than the murder rate for blacks, whites in the South, men. So no, it's not supremely dangerous to be trans. The one group of people that had a really high murder rate that were trans were quote unquote black trans women. But you have to put that in the context of the fact that like the overall US murder rate is like 6 per 100,000 per year. And the black murder rate's like 35. So you'd assume that there's going to be 5x that level of violence if you are a biological male living in a hood or a black community. And that's what we found. And most of the deaths of trans women, black or white, came from really unsympathetic stuff. Like I'm an HIV positive prostitute and I don't tell men that I have a dick. So every so often I get in a violent fight with a US Navy sailor kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was literally how many of these people were killed. They would perform sex acts on gang members, soldiers and sailors, other kind of high testosterone guys. And they would be exposed as trans when someone was like, okay, hike up your dress. Let's go to the next step. And then there'd be a physical fight because this is a man and the person would be injured. So yeah, it's not particularly dangerous to be trans. The groups most likely to kill trans people also were like black men, Hispanic men. So the narrative there really falls apart.
If you're born black male and you are later black female, when you get murdered, are you a black man or a black woman?
Like you're a black woman. It's actually an interesting point because, I mean, when you look at so there's been about a 9% surge in crime for women lately, And I'm kind of curious about that because, again, almost 1% of people are trans. Most of them identify as females. So it's maybe 2%. I mean, if you've got a large number of men in your female sample, I mean, that alone could account for a 9% surge in crime. Because men have wildly higher crime rates than women. Now, I will say that's crime you can get caught for. Like, there's no, like if you get a late term abortion or quietly commit infanticide, you're not going to get in any trouble for that. But if you're looking at murder, robbery, the male female crime gap is larger than like the black white crime gap, so on. So if you are a trans woman and you are killed, you probably do go down as female in a lot of states. I know you do in California.
Okay, yeah,
That might
which is
that's
interesting for
probably
data.
part. Now that's most of
Yeah.
it's just gang banging and taking drugs, but I mean that might account for part of the extremely high black female murder rate. But
Yeah.
again, I mean that still that comes from an underlying really high black murder rate because white trans women in those same states, trans women would also probably be listed as female. This is something I'd have to check on really before I said
Yeah.
anything definitive about it.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why I bring this up and why I made that transition is we talked about USAID and they struggle to have these dead people show up on paper because we know how hard it is to gather data in a conflict or a non-permissive area. We talked about the Hamas thing. And so I'm told all the time about how dangerous it is or how much suicide and how we have to do these things. And then now, and look, I'm not against anybody. I don't want anybody to, kill themselves or be killed by somebody else. But how does society actively improve the condition of trans folks? And I don't know that anybody has the answer to that, even the trans folks. It's just, is it that dangerous? And this kind of takes us to another little thing with numbers that we play a game with. The folks who are the urbanists who want to pack people into tall buildings and have them ride buses, and they love to be totalitarians. They're like, damn it, just do what I say. They love this, but they will claim that driving is insanely dangerous thing. And we see the numbers just not true. Yeah, maybe there's a little bump right now, but give it 60 years and that bump will disappear completely because driving has gotten safer and safer. And the fact is, and they hate this, Americans drive over 1 trillion or 2 trillion. It's like a lot of miles every year. And then you think about every left turn, every backup, every lane change, all of the variables that go in that. And the death rate is just, it's minuscule. And look, insurance companies don't give out insurance to lose money. They know what to do. So when you see numbers like these, like, oh my God, it's 14 people out of 14 are going to get in an accident this year. And I'm being dramatic. That's not the number they cite, but the number they cite looks uncomfortable until you realize I can expect to drive 500 miles across many states and not in any way expect to have anything happen other than I get out of the car in 500 miles and walk in the door safe as can be without having mowed over anybody.
Yeah, I mean, so there are two different questions there. Like, what can society do for trans people? I mean, this will be interesting for. I don't think that society can really do anything for trans people. I mean, I don't hate quote unquote trans people, but I think that they're people with the mental illness of gender dysphoria or autogynephilia. And I mean, it does have to, in some sense, feel terrible to feel not at home in your body.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's what I would actually recommend we do is teach people that their mental perception is incongruent with their body and not vice versa. And I mean, you could react to that by either changing how your body appears, or I think this would be better, realizing that you are a member of the sex that you are. And there's a debate on this. Like we're talking to Pat Lockwood on Cut the Bull tonight. There's a debate on this in psychiatry, but I mean that's really it. I don't think there's a way to get around that fact.
Yeah.
So, and Manko Smash here is a buddy of mine on Twitter says this is because all the bad things women do are perfectly legal. And women do things like stealing, always get diversion and wrist slaps. That's probably true. I mean, the one time I looked at this in a published paper, which went into the proceeds of the Midwest Political Science Association conference, but women just being female in court was a big winning advantage. So like if you were a woman instead of a man and you're otherwise exactly the same in terms of your core characteristics, you were from in town or out or whatever, you were like 3 times as likely to win your case. And a lot of other female stuff. I mean, like it's not illegal to quote unquote transmit STDs. It's not illegal to cheat. It's not very illegal in the OnlyFans era to be a prostitute. So I do think we're nicer to female coded crimes than to male coded crimes. And I think a feminist would respond to that by saying, well, that's because male coded crimes get a lot of people killed. Like you guys do the equivalent of challenging people to duels. Like you'll shoot a house 22 times. We're just out here being whores. There's an important social role for that actually. And that's very unpolitically correct, but it's probably true. But anyway, trans people, I mean, I think that every study that's looked at the efficacy of treatment has really pretty much found nothing. I mean, most of them, if anything, indicate that it's probably better off. You're probably better off if you don't do massive physical abuse, because at the end of the massive physical abuse, you're still recognizably the sex you are, but you've badly damaged yourself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So like the Swedish studies that have looked at people who quote unquote transition years after transition, I mean, you have like a fake vagina made with corpse skin. You have a very visible scar where your penis used to be. Like you're still 6'1" in those Norwegian countries, like Scandinavian countries. Like you're not convinced that you look like a normal woman, but all these things have happened to you. So I would recommend kind of a talk therapy approach, but I don't know. Again, I'm not a mental health professional.
Yeah.
So
No, for sure. Same.
yeah, but there's nothing. I don't think there's anything you can do about that. It's just like being crazy to some extent. Like, and people will hate that comment, but you're a person of one sex. That we can complicate this with gender and so on, but who's trying to be a member of the opposite sex. And the core issue is that you really can't do that. I would say that's what it all comes down to. The other dangers that you were talking about, like why do people, if you have a very high chance of dying in a car accident each year, like there are 50,000 automobile accident deaths every year or close, why are we more afraid of domestic violence or murder or something like that than of driving? I think a short answer to that would just be it depends how much time you spend doing the thing. So, I mean, like the average person drives for 2 hours a day, and your chances of being harmed while driving relative to that amount of time, relative to what 730 hours per year, are extremely, extremely low. Whereas your chances of getting in a bar fight relative to the amount of time that you spend in tough country and hip hop bars are really, really high. So I think everyone kind of knows like it would be much more dangerous for me to walk through the ghetto at night in a suit made of $100 bills than it would for me to get behind the wheel. So that's the reason. Like there actually are mathematical answers to all these questions that are at about a stats like 200, 300 level. That's the reason there, just per capita.
Yeah. Having gone through my own young man time and spent some time in court, nothing crazy, but you spend time in court and you learn about it. Um, I would bet that there is a statistically provable number of people who get incarcerated more, or I should say, put behind bars more because of where their letter lands in the alphabet. Because when you go to court, you have all the lawyers go first, then the translators, then the lawyers come back, and then it's A, and then any other interruptions until you get to a guy like me, TUR. I mean, I'm at the back end. Guess what? The judge and the DA have had it. They're over it. And so you sit there and you watch everybody use up all the good faith. And at 4:55, maybe there's a gap where it starts to go the other direction. We're like, just get out of here, dismissed or something. But I sure have seen those guys get angrier and angrier. I wonder if someone's ever done research on the letter of the alphabet, which one gets more convictions.
I've never seen that, but that is an interesting possibility. I don't see why you're probably right. We just don't know. But yeah, like there are a lot of people who said as qualitative researchers, it probably makes more of a difference what the judge had for breakfast, i.e. like some Tabasco laced omelet that's going to have them running in and out of the courtroom and feeling a little surly. That probably makes more difference than the is the judge hungover than the actual specifics of your case. I mean, like almost every case is going to be young black dude or working class white guy, male, fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so that there's really probably not going to be that much of a range there. But how does the judge feel? Has the judge been the on deck judge for 3 days in a row? I think we all know those things probably do have a pretty significant effect. We should probably, you'd have to code this as just a binary variable if you're using linear regression. This actually came up on my page today. But yeah, you could do like before noon, afternoon. Is that predictive of what your chances of going to jail are? What about just hour of time in court? So like first hour, second hour, third hour, fourth hour, fifth hour, sixth hour. So all this, again, it's interesting kind of grad school level stats. I'd be curious what that result was. Manko, again, it's like, this is correct, actually. A lot of this stuff is like statistically you're in no danger from sharks, but try getting in a shark tank and see what happens. Yeah, so that's this actually, while we're just having fun with math, I mean, this is the whole thing with the women choose the bear, right? Where all these, I won't say like these broads online, but all these women are saying like, statistically 2,000 women are killed every year by men. Only 5 are killed by bears. It's safer to be alone in the woods with a grizzly bear than with a man. The obvious reality is that if you have a male lover, you spend 10 hours of your day, including time when you're helplessly asleep, with a man. You've
Yeah.
spent no minutes in your entire life as an LA or Chicago girl surrounded by bears. So, I mean, you have to adjust to that. Like you're talking about 10,000 X versus X. So if
Right.
X is 5 and 10,000 X is 2,000, like X is actually clearly more dangerous, if that makes sense. And
Sure.
the simple example of this is you don't see people jumping into the bear enclosure or the shark tank at the zoo/aquarium downtown to get away from the guys that are walking around,
Right.
pleasantly chomping on an ice cream with their date. So like all this per capita analysis is really important. It's one of the first things that kind of nobody does, but that's pretty useful.
It's also true that you don't hear a bear say, you're always up my ass about this. Get off my back." He just goes, "Rah!" and he bears it. And then the conversation is over because you can't humans interact in a way that bears wouldn't tolerate for much very long at all. They're bears. Yeah,
The
just one
bears.
more one more topic real quick.
Oh, bear.
Bear's gonna bear. Yeah, the use of numbers to kind of tell these stories, whether it's deaths in Hamasville or it's women and bears getting into relationships and everything, it's interesting. When you read the news, do you see that kind of spin? And is it just numbers related? Is it like I'm particular about extra adjectives and in the use of adverbs? That tells me that someone's selling more than telling me what happened with the news.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Like when you read the news, right? Do you see the problems with the numbers, or do you also, like me, see the problems with the word choice? So when they tell one side of the story, they don't quote the person they're talking about. They don't account for, hey, I called this person to get a quote. They didn't respond. They don't do any of those things. They just tell you one side of the story, and it's filled with adjectives and adverbs. These are hallmarks of influence-based operations as opposed to a news operation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the media does that very often. I mean, there was a study that looked at how often people who are on the legitimately pretty hard right, like at the time it would have been Orrin Hatch or something like that, were referred to as hard right. It was almost every time they came on television, and if you ever go on TV a lot, you get pretty friendly with them. So it's still like, our hard right buddy, Orrin Hatch, coming from the wilds of Utah. But then they looked at how people like Ted Kennedy, who were obviously far left, were referred to. And it was always just like, the Lion of the Senate, the Democrat from Massachusetts, Mr. Edward Kennedy. So there was a lot of that. We see this actually with Middle East coverage because so much content from the Middle East. I mean, I assume you're very familiar military background with like how this works, but like news organizations don't have full teams with like the new $20,000 cameras on the ground in every city. You're
Right.
relying on the work of local stringers, which is why you have all these clowns on Twitter and Instagram with like press badges on, like, Palestinian media figure, or the next picture is like them with a gun. And there's this whole discussion about like a number of journalists being killed in this war. But anyway, like in the Middle East, most of your coverage comes from people like that. A lot of it is Qatar funded. A lot of it is going to go first to Al Jazeera, Al Jazz, which is the big news channel over there. So it's a pretty safe bet that you're getting content with an extreme slant when you're getting content on the Middle East. Like our journalists themselves, many of them are Jewish, many of them are black, they may be pro-Israel, but every video that they're showing is cut from a region where most of the stringers live in that region, are devout Muslims, so on down the line.
Right.
And I mean, that has effects. Like the classic example is there's a scene where a group of Palestinian fighters are shooting at the Israelis and they hit a kid. The Israelis shoot back. This is an actual example. It's used in a lot of media studies books. The Israeli soldiers shoot back and they hit a couple Palestinians. But the clip that you get starts when the Israeli soldiers start shooting.
Right.
So you see
Yeah.
the dead kid, you see the Israelis shooting, and you see the Palestinian casualties. You never see the Palestinian shooting. And
Right.
that's how you bias media. The way you bias media is that you never see the Palestinian shooting. You never see the first thing that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also the rule: if you don't want people to die, don't start a war. You know.
Yeah, fair. Very fair.
Anything
Yeah,
else
no,
you want to do? Go ahead.
no, not really. I mean, I'll do a
No.
one sentence comment on that, but just like, yeah, I think that one of the big debates I've been having with feminists online for like 3 weeks is me saying things like, obviously, in a relationship, you're expected to sexually satisfy your partner or run the house if you don't contribute much financially. And all these people just responding with this crazy stuff like, as a queen, I don't have to do nothing. And I think that in our society right now, we've very much gotten away from like the grandpa style blunt truth. So yeah, like of course, if you start a war and you kill more than 1,000 soldiers and women on the other side, historically they just would have wiped you out. Now,
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sympathetic toward Israel on every point
of course.
either, but just you've got to understand that like you don't start wars. If you start wars and you're losing, you surrender. What Hamas is pressing for is some new thing in the world where you start wars, lose wars, get a mulligan, and then start a war again. And because rules aren't objectively real, I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's going to agree with that. I don't think people are going to go along with that.
Yeah. Well, in Israel, again, they're going to believe you. And so those dudes sitting sweet and happy in Qatar, when they leave the house, Mossad's, they've got something for them. We've talked a lot in the show about how ingenious Mossad is and their ability to infiltrate. I mean, and this is just blows my mind, the Hezbollah thing, where they got someone to agree to a purchase order for a bunch of walkie-talkies and pagers so that they could buy their own demise. I mean, that is genius level stuff. And then the Israelis ran it through their own shell company, so they got to keep the profit. So the Hezbollah paid for their own demise with this obsolete technology. How hilarious is that? In a macabre kind of way, granted. But if you are the enemy and Israel is what you're looking at, you better watch out. Because and here's the thing: is after the recent Iran attacks, a lot of Iranians died because the Iranian heads of state, they didn't know who was and wasn't compromised. And so in this case, you kill them. You kill people. I have a question, bam, you're dead. And they move on to the next person. You clean house because that's what warlords do. So anyhow, I'll shut up about that. Anything you want to say about that, or you want us to wrap it up? Mike is yours.
No, I'm pretty much done for the day. Just remember that obvious truth is real. If you want to live a long time, don't start a war with the Israelis or, for that matter, the Persians. And the same kind of practical realities go in your own day-to-day life. So that's all I've got to say.
Love it. All right, let me wrap this up. I'll see you all later on. There's a show tomorrow. And Will, I'll talk to you in a second.